The desert stretched endlessly in front of Elena, a shimmering sea of heat and dust that swallowed every trace of the life she once knew. Her hands trembled inside the leather bindings of the wagon, not from fear, but from the sharp finality of what awaited her. She was no longer the rancher's daughter from Santa Fe, no longer the girl who believed in mornings filled with laughter and evenings filled with music. Now she was a bride sent away in the name of peace, traded like a possession, delivered as an offering to the most powerful Apache leader in the territory as the wagon rolled closer to the sprawling Apache camp. Her heart squeezed painfully. Colorful hides and high wooden poles marked the homes of warriors whose names carried the weight of storms. Firelight flickered even in daylight, casting moving shadows on men with painted faces and watchful eyes. This was their world, not hers. A world where the wrong breath, the wrong word, could shatter any illusion of safety she swallowed as the wagon finally creaked to a halt. Dust swirled around her boots when she stepped down, tugging at her skirt as if urging her to flee. But she had nowhere to run. Not anymore. Behind her was a family that no longer wanted her. Ahead stood the tribe that already thought she was a burden. The elders approached first, their eyes sharp with questions she could not answer. They murmured to each other, glancing at her, judging her worth. It was not cruelty she sensed, but calculation. She was young, strong enough, and her marriage to their king meant the possibility of strengthening the future. But Elena felt every stare like a weight on her chest. If she failed here, she would fail forever, and then she saw Himkadan. The Apache king stepped out from behind a row of warriors. He was taller than any man she had seen, his shoulders broad beneath a mantle of wolf fur, his hair falling in long black waves that caught the sun. His face was carved in shadows and lines of command, but his eyes held something deeper, something unreadable and dangerous. Around him, men straightened their backs. Even the wind felt as though it stilled. He stopped only a few feet from her, his gaze sweeping over her like a silent judgment. Elena lifted her chin to meet his eyes. If she lowered her head, she would be agreeing with everything her father ever said about her weakness. If she trembled, she would be giving him reason to push her aside. So she stood firm, though her heart pounded like the hooves of 1,000 wild horses. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them thickened with expectation. The elders waited for her to bow. The warriors expected her to cry out or plead. But Elena had walked too far through shame to kneel now. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice steady though her throat felt tight. "Can you give me a son?" The words left her mouth with a force she did not anticipate. Gasps rippled through the camp. No woman had ever spoken to the Apache king with such boldness. Not even his own people. Elena felt their shock but did not look away from him. Her question was not born of desire but of survival. A son meant protection. A son meant she belonged somewhere. A son meant she had worth. Caden's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in curiosity. She felt him studying her, peeling away her fear as if testing the strength beneath it. His silence stretched long enough for her breathing to quicken. But then he stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat rising from his skin. His voice, when it finally came, was low and rough, carrying a promise that struck through her like lightning. "Come all night." Whispers broke out instantly. Some women covered their mouths. Warriors exchanged glances. No one knew what the king intended, whether it was a challenge, a vow, or something more dangerous. But Elena held her ground. The answer she had received was not the polite reassurance of a gentle husband. It was the claim of a man who ruled with fire and expected the same from anyone who stood beside him as he turned to lead her into his camp. Elena felt her future shift with the weight of his words. She had asked for a son, but she sensed that what awaited her was far more than a simple promise. It was the beginning of a destiny neither she nor the king nor the Kilimna Apache King was prepared for Kadon did not look back to see whether Elena followed. He simply walked, long strides carrying him across the camp with the certainty of a man who had never once questioned his place in the world. And yet the entire Apache village watched her, every woman, every warrior, every child peeking from behind woven hides, waiting to see if the foreign bride would break. Elena's heartbeat thundered as she stepped forward, her boots sinking softly into the sand. The desert wind tugged at her hair, tossing auburn strands across her face as though trying to shield her from the stares. But she refused to hide. She followed the Apache King into the heart of his territory. Aware that every step sealed her fate a little tighter, the murmur of voices rose behind her, a mix of shock and curiosity. His words, "Come all night," had struck the camp like a blade of thunder. Some whispered that it was a claim. Others said it was a test, a dare meant to expose whether she possessed the courage to stand beside a man as feared as Kadon. A few murmured that perhaps the spirits had sent him a wife bold enough to challenge him, but Elena kept walking. The king's back was straight, powerful, marked with scars that disappeared beneath leather and beads. He looked carved from the land itself, a part of the desert wind and the burning sun. And she, pale, foreign, nervous, had just asked him for a son, as if the world weren't watching at the edge of the central fire pit. He finally stopped. Flames crackled in the daylight, their smoke drifting upward in thin gray ribbons. Kadon turned toward her, and for the first time his expression held something other than stoic command. It was not softness, not exactly. More like intrigue. As if she were the first thing in years that truly made him think. "You speak boldly for someone who fears this place," he said, his voice steady as stone. "I don't fear your people," she answered, forcing her breath to remain even. "I fear having no place in the world. If I am to stay here, then I must have purpose." Her words surprised even herself. She had never spoken so plainly to any man before, not even to her father. But Kadon seemed to draw honesty from her like water from a well. The firelight flickered over his strong features. He took a single step closer, shrinking the space between them until she could feel the tension coil in the air. The warriors around them grew silent, sensing that something significant was unfolding. "A son," he said slowly, as if testing the word. "You believe a child will give you purpose. It will give me a place," she murmured. "A reason for your people to see me as more than a burden. It will give me something no one can take away." His jaw tightened at that, a shadow passing briefly through his eyes. The camp had whispered for years that Kadon carried losses too heavy for any one man, that perhaps fate had denied him the family he secretly wanted. Elena could not yet know those stories, but she sensed the shadow now, something wounded beneath his strength. "You surprise me," he said finally. "Your courage is sharp, like a blade hidden in silk." "I have had to learn courage," she said quietly. "Life did not give me softness." For a heartbeat, he simply studied her. Something about her answer struck him deeper than he let anyone see. Then he turned his head toward the gathered women and elders, lifting his voice so all could hear. "This woman speaks with a heart unafraid. She comes to my lodge by choice." Gasps rose again. No Apache king had ever spoken those words about a bride given to him from outside the tribe. It was both an acknowledgement and a warning that she was not here as a captive, but as someone who dared to stand beside him. Kadon faced her once more, his gaze steady, his meaning unmistakably clear. "Tonight you asked me for a son," he said. "I answered you with my promise. But understand this, Elena. If you stay in my lodge, you stay not only for the night, but for the life that follows." Her breath caught. Not from fear, from something dangerously close to hope, and as the fire snapped between them, she realized that the words "come all night" did not mean what the camp thought. They were not simply a claim of a man over a wife. They were a doorway he had opened. a willingness to share all the hours of darkness with her, not just as a king, but as a man who had lived too long without warmth. She lifted her chin once more. I will stay. Kaidan's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a promise deeper than the desert night itself. The sun dipped behind the jagged mountains as Kaidan led Elena toward his lodge. The sky burned with oranges and reds, as if the world itself felt the tension rising between them. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and Elena felt each step take her deeper into a life she had never imagined for herself. She expected him to walk in silence, to keep the distance of a man who accepted a bride only out of duty, but the Apache king surprised her. At the entrance to his lodge, a grand structure of tanned hides, wooden beams, and painted markings, he turned to face her. The glow of dusk lit his skin, highlighting the strength in his jaw and the sharp angles of his cheekbones. He looked like a warrior carved from firelight and destiny. You enter my lodge as my wife, he said quietly. Not as a prisoner, not as a stranger. Remember that. His tone held no softness, not yet. But there was an undeniable truth in it, something she felt settled deep within her chest. She nodded and stepped inside. The interior was larger than she expected. A warm fire crackled in a stone circle at the center, painting the walls with gentle amber light. Furs lay across the floor, thick and soft. Weapons hung neatly along one wall, ceremonial items along another. It was a place of strength, but also of surprising warmth. A place lived in by a man who carried the weight of a nation. Her breath hitched when she turned and saw him still watching her. Unreadable in the shifting glow. You expected coldness, he said. Reading her thoughts without effort, I'm not sure what to expect. She admitted. His lips twitched almost, but not quite, a smile. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, powerful. The closer he came, the more she felt the air stir around her, filled with heat and the scent of sage and leather. You asked me for a son, he said. Few women have dared to ask me anything. But you walked into my camp with steel in your heart. That is why I answered you. The words you said? She began, her voice catching. They shocked your people. They shocked me as well, he replied. She blinked in surprise. For a moment, she saw the man behind the title, the one who carried battles on his skin and solitude in his bones. The man who had once loved and lost. The man whose heart had built walls too thick for most to reach. And yet she sensed something shifting in him, something cautious and fierce. All at once Kaidan walked past her and set a clay jug of water on a low table. His movements were efficient but heavy with thought. Elena watched him, realizing she knew almost nothing about him beyond the legends whispered along the frontier. He finally spoke, his back still turned. You believe a child will secure your place. But understand this. A son born in my lodge will be heir to my people. That is no small promise to ask of me. Or of yourself. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her skirt. She had spoken boldly, but she hadn't fully understood what her words meant in his world, how deep the responsibility flowed. I know, she whispered. But I also know what it means to be unwanted, to be thrown aside. A child would give me a future. Kaidan turned slowly, and this time his expression was fully stripped of the stoic mask he often wore. Something raw flickered in his dark eyes. You think I take women without thought. But I do not, he said. The heart of my people is tied to mine. If I choose, if I allow myself to build a family, I must be certain it is with a woman strong enough to stand through fire. And do you think I'm not strong enough? She asked softly. He stepped closer until only a breath separated them. She could feel the heat from his skin, the weight of his gaze. The power coiled inside him like a storm waiting to break. You walked into a warrior camp alone, he murmured. You met my eyes when no one else dared. You stood when others would kneel. I see more strength in you than you see in yourself. Her heart pounded. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but she didn't. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, grazing her skin with a gentleness she never expected from a man feared by so many. "Elena," he whispered, her name rumbling like distant thunder. "This marriage may have begun from need, but there is fire here. I feel it. And fire can build a life as surely as it can destroy one." She swallowed, breath catching. "Then what do you want from me tonight?" she asked, her voice trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming closeness of him. Kedon lowered his forehead to hers, his breath warm, his presence all-encompassing. "I want truth. I want courage. And if the spirits allow it, I want to see where this fire leads us." Her pulse raced as she whispered, "Then I will follow it." By the next morning, the desert sun had climbed high, burning away the night's chill and revealing the sprawling Apache camp in all its vibrant chaos. Fires crackled at the edges of tents, children chased each other through the dust, and warriors polished weapons or drilled formations in the sand. Yet amidst the daily rhythm, whispers of the previous night swirled like the heat haze rising from the ground. Elena walked beside Kedon, still unsteady in her new role, but determined to appear composed. The words he had spoken the night before, "Come all night," were no longer just a private promise. In the way Apache society functioned, news traveled fast, carried by those who lived between shadows and wind. Every glance, every nod in her direction seemed to carry judgment, curiosity, or suspicion. And she felt it all. The women watched her the most, their expressions a mixture of caution and intrigue. They had known Kedon for years. They had seen him take wives before, women who were gentle, quiet, obedient. But Elena had done something none of them had dared. She had spoken directly to him, demanded a future for herself, and had been met not with dismissal, but with agreement. That audacity had unsettled the camp. Even the warriors were whispering. Some were wary. A strong, determined bride meant a challenge to the authority they had quietly maintained over the household. Others were curious. A child born of Kedon would be more than an heir. It would be a symbol of power, a living testament that the king could choose freely, that his line could continue unbroken. Yet Elena herself sensed a different kind of danger. Beyond the camp, the world beyond the mountains was always watching. Rumors traveled fast along the trade routes and through scattered settlements. Outlaws, rival tribes, and soldiers who still held grudges against the Apache had already begun to take notice. A bride, especially a foreign bride who dared to speak boldly, might seem like a small thing, but her presence could be exploited. Anyone seeking leverage over Kedon would see her as a tool, or a threat. By midday, Elena noticed men lingering at the edge of the camp, just beyond the fires. Their eyes were calculating, scanning the lodge where she now spent her nights. She could feel their gaze like a weight, heavy and dangerous. Kedon had not yet spoken of the threat, but she knew it existed. The world outside was never kind to those who dared to claim love or power inside the Apache lands. Yet there was also a strange, unspoken solidarity in the camp. The women who had initially observed her with suspicion now offered quiet nods or brief smiles when she passed. They seemed to recognize the courage it took to ask for a son, to meet the king's gaze without flinching, to claim a future that had been denied. Some of the older warriors, too, glanced at Kedon and Elena with subtle respect, sensing that this was a union born not only of duty but of fire, the kind of fire that shapes legacies. Late that afternoon, Kedon finally approached her while she was near the water trough, washing her hands in preparation for the evening meal. His expression was unreadable, his movements fluid and precise, but the intensity in his eyes betrayed a simmering concern. "Their watch," he said simply, standing behind her, his shadow stretching across the water. "Not all are allies. Some see weakness where there is none, and some see opportunity where there should be none." "I know," Elena replied. She did not look away. "I can handle their whispers." "You are strong," he acknowledged almost grudgingly. "But strength alone may not protect you." She turned to him, meeting his dark gaze, her own resolve hardening. "Then I will stand by your side," she said. "Not as a pawn, not as a wife for convenience, but as someone who belongs here because I choose to." Kedon's lips tightened. He said nothing further, but the faintest curve of his mouth hinted at approval. The camp's eyes may have been on them. The world may have been watching, but in that moment, Elena felt the first stirrings of belonging, not just as a wife, but as a partner in a life that had once seemed impossible. And as the wind whispered through the tents and the fires burned bright, she knew one thing with clarity: her place in the camp was no longer determined by the world outside. It was determined by the courage she had shown and the man who had met her boldness with his own. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the camp in shades of gold and amber. Elena had barely slept, her mind racing with the events of the previous night and the reality of the life she had chosen or had been forced to accept. Today was her first real test, and she knew it would not be measured in words or ceremony but in endurance, skill, and courage. Kedon had left early, riding off to oversee hunters and warriors preparing for the day. His absence gave her a moment to breathe, but it also reminded her of the challenge she faced. The women of the camp approached, some smiling faintly, others observing her with the quiet scrutiny of seasoned warriors. They did not speak, yet their eyes communicated volumes. To survive here, she would need to learn their ways, respect their rules, and prove herself worthy not only of Dawn's notice but of the camp's acceptance. Her first task was simple in appearance. She was to care for the horses. But simplicity was deceptive. The creatures were strong, proud, and unaccustomed to a hand that hesitated. One stallion, chestnut with a white blaze across his forehead, snorted violently and stamped the dirt, tossing his head as if testing her resolve. Elena swallowed her fear, remembered her father's lessons in riding, and stepped forward. She spoke softly, her voice firm yet calm, coaxing the animal closer. Sweat pricked her forehead, and her hands trembled. But gradually the stallion lowered his head, allowing her to braid his mane and brush the dust from his coat. The women watching whispered among themselves, a murmur of approval that buoyed her spirits. Next came the lessons in daily camp life. Cooking over open fires, weaving hides, carrying water from the distant well, these tasks were grueling, especially under the relentless desert sun. Elena's muscles ached in ways she had never imagined, yet she endured. She felt the eyes of Kedon's people upon her, weighing every movement, testing her resilience. She realized that to survive here, she could not rely on charm or the king's favor alone. She would have to earn respect through action, through courage, and through a willingness to face discomfort without complaint. Her final trial came unexpectedly. As she returned to the lodge, a rattlesnake, coiled and hissing, blocked her path near the entrance. Panic surged through her chest, but she remembered the words Kedon had spoken the night she arrived. That courage was measured not in the absence of fear, but in the choice to act despite it. She froze for a moment, calculating her move, then slowly lifted a long branch from the ground, guiding the snake away from her path without harming it. The elders who had watched from the edge of the camp nodded in quiet approval. Even the warriors, passing by with their tasks, paused briefly, acknowledging her bravery with a subtle glance. Later, as the sun began its descent, Kedon returned. He had observed her from a distance during parts of the day, though Elena had not realized it. Now standing before her, he studied her with a look that was both measured and unreadable. "You handled the horse," he said, his voice low but clear. "You endured the tasks. You faced fear without faltering. Not all women could have done that. Elena felt a flush of pride. I only did what I had to, she admitted. I want to belong here, Kaydan. I want to earn your trust. His dark eyes softened ever so slightly. Courage alone does not make one a queen, nor a mother to my people, he said. But it is a beginning. You have taken the first step. For the first time, Elena saw a glimpse of what life with Kaydan could be. It would not be easy. She would have to continue learning, continue proving herself, continue navigating the complex and often dangerous world of the Apache camp. But she felt a new sense of purpose settling into her chest. A sense that she could endure whatever came next, and as the camp settled for the night, fires glowing softly against the encroaching darkness, Elena realized she was no longer just a bride sent to a foreign land. She was becoming a part of something larger, a life filled with challenge, courage, and the slow, steady heat of a dangerous, consuming love. The night fell swiftly over the Apache camp, the sky an endless stretch of black velvet dotted with countless stars. A cool breeze swept across the desert, carrying the scent of sage and burning wood, and Elena found herself sitting near the lodge's fire, wrapped in a fur she had learned to wear properly only days before. Her heart still raced from the day's trials, from the horses, the labor, the rattlesnake. Yet a new tension had taken its place, an unspoken anticipation of what Kaydan might say tonight. He appeared quietly, stepping from the shadows like a predator of the desert. The flickering firelight caught the sharp lines of his face, highlighting the scars etched across his cheek and collarbone. There was a weight in his step that Elena had not seen before, a heaviness she had only glimpsed. When he thought no one was watching, Kaydan sat beside her without a word, the silence stretching long and filled with expectation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough as gravel, carrying the kind of pain that only years of battles could produce. I have not taken a wife before you, he said, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames rather than on her. Not because I did not desire it, but because every woman I loved was taken from me. Elena's breath caught. She had seen hints of this in him, the quiet moments of brooding, the shadows behind his otherwise commanding presence, but she had never known the depth of his sorrow. She turned to face him fully, her hands resting on her lap, steady despite the storm of emotion rising in her chest. Taken? She asked softly. By war? Kaydan nodded, his jaw tightening. By war and betrayal. I have buried more than I can count, fought battles that left holes in my soul no victory could fill. Every bond I thought permanent ended with loss, and I swore I would never allow it to happen again. Elena reached out almost instinctively, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. He did not pull away. Instead, he allowed her touch, and in that simple act, something unspoken passed between them. Vulnerability, trust, a flicker of hope that perhaps this night, this moment could be different. I do not believe you are cursed, she whispered, her voice trembling not from fear but from conviction. I believe you are chosen for something greater, for a family, for a life that matters. You have carried pain enough. You do not need to carry it alone anymore. Kaydan's eyes lifted, dark and intense, meeting hers with a raw honesty that left her breathless. And what of you? He asked quietly. Can you bear the weight of my past, my enemies, my failures? Can you face the blood and fire that comes with being beside me? Elena swallowed. Her own heart ached, the knowledge of her losses and hardships mingling with the undeniable pull she felt toward him. I can, she said. I do not expect it to be easy, but I will stand with you, not as someone who seeks comfort, but as someone who chooses to fight alongside you. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze distant, lost in the shadows of memory and regret. Then, slowly, he leaned closer, the heat of his presence mingling with the fire between them. "You speak boldly," he murmured. "Boldness has always been dangerous. Yet you have courage enough to face me fully. That is a rare gift." Elena's pulse quickened. The unspoken electricity between them thickened, a tension of desire, fear, and mutual respect. She felt the power in him not just as a warrior or a king, but as a man who had suffered, who had survived, who had loved and lost and was willing, for the first time in years, to allow himself to feel again. Kaydan finally lowered his forehead to hers, a gesture of closeness so intimate it made her heart hammer. "Tonight," he whispered, "we see if what we hold can survive not just the trials of life, but the truth of our hearts. I have carried shadows for too long. I will not hide from them any more. Not from you." Elena closed her eyes, leaning into him, and felt the first real connection, the warmth, the strength, and the fragility all at once. In the vast, harsh desert, surrounded by the watchful tribe and the endless night, she realized that the fire between them was no longer just a spark. It was the beginning of a flame that could endure anything, and in that silence, filled with unspoken promises and shared courage, both knew the night would not be just another trial. It would be a turning point, a night where wounds were acknowledged, fears confronted, and hearts quietly, irreversibly changed. The desert dawn broke with a startling clarity, the sun sharp against the horizon, and yet the calm of morning was shattered before it could fully settle. From the far ridge, the first signs of danger appeared. Clouds of dust kicked up by horsemen, unfamiliar shapes moving with intent. Elena had barely risen when a scout ran into the camp, shouting in urgent tones that set hearts racing. Raiders were approaching, seeking the king's lodge. Panic flickered across the faces of some villagers, but Kaydan's presence calmed the center of the storm. He moved swiftly, issuing orders to warriors and women alike, his voice carrying authority that brooked no hesitation. Yet Elena felt her pulse hammer in her chest, not just from fear, but from the knowledge that this was her first real test of courage under fire, a trial far greater than learning to ride or tend horses. "Stay close," Kaydan said, grabbing her hand briefly. "But do not hide," Elena nodded, swallowing her fear. She had come here to earn her place, and if that meant standing beside him in battle, she would not falter. The attackers arrived with a roar, striking swiftly at the outer edges of the camp. Fires erupted as the first arrows flew, and chaos descended. But Elena, remembering the lessons of the previous days, refused to run. She grabbed a bow, her fingers trembling at first, and took aim at a raider trying to breach the outer fence. Her first shot missed, but her second found its mark, and the man faltered. A flicker of exhilaration surged through her alongside her fear. She realized she was no longer a passive participant in this world. She was a defender, a woman who could stand and fight. Kaydan fought nearby, moving with deadly precision, his movements a blend of instinct, experience, and raw power. Elena kept her eyes on him, learning, matching her own strikes to the rhythm of his. At one point, a raider lunged toward her, and Kaydan's hand shot out, grasping her arm and pulling her to safety. But instead of shielding her entirely, he nodded at her, almost daring her to continue. The unspoken challenge electrified her, and she found herself meeting it with determination. As the battle raged, the tribe's warriors rallied behind Kaydan, but it was Elena's courage that drew murmurs of respect. The women whispered to one another, noting the bride who did not cower, who faced the storm of steel and fire without flinching. Even the elders, normally reserved, recognized the strength in her eyes, a strength that mirrored the king's own resolve. When the last of the raiders fled, the camp was left shaken but intact. Fires were extinguished, wounded were tended, and Kaydan finally turned to Elena, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, the corners of his mouth lifted not. A smile not yet, but the faintest acknowledgment of approval. "You fought," he said quietly, his voice carrying over the crackling remnants of the fires. "You risked your life for my people." Elena's chest heaved. "I only did what I had to," she said, her voice strong despite the tremor in her hands. "I could not stand by and let them fall." Kadon stepped closer, his eyes dark with a mixture of admiration and something far more intimate. He lifted her hand, brushing it gently against his chest. "No one has ever shown such courage before," he murmured. "Not for me, not for my tribe. You have proven more than I expected, more than I dared to hope." Her heart raced as she met his gaze. For the first time, she sensed not just the warrior or the king before her, but the man who could. Love, who could see her, who could finally allow himself to trust and desire. I only wanted to belong," she admitted, "to earn my place. And Her words faltered under the weight of his gaze. Kadon leaned closer, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "You belong," he said simply, with the finality of someone who had fought through pain, fear, and solitude. "Not just here, not just as my bride, but in my life. And if you stay, I will see you as more than that. I will see you as mine." The camp around them buzzed with the aftermath of battle, but for a moment the desert fell away. Only Elena and Kadon remained, two souls bound by courage, fire, and an undeniable, growing desire. The battle had tested her in ways she never expected, but it had also shown them both the truth that love, like courage, could not be hidden when it burned this fiercely, and as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, Elena realized that she had not only survived the night, she had claimed her place beside Kadon, and nothing, no enemy, no whisper, no fear could take it away. The desert awoke slowly, the first light spilling over the horizon in soft gold and rose. The camp was quiet now, the echoes of the previous night's battle fading into the wind that swept across the sand. Fires burned low, embers glowing faintly as the tribe tended to their wounded and repaired the damage left by the raiders. And in the center of it all, Elena stood beside Kadon, feeling for the first time the full weight and warmth of her place in this new world. Kadon's eyes, dark and steady, met hers. There was no need for words. The battles, the trials, the nights spent learning, struggling, and facing fear together had already spoken. He took her hand, lifting it to his lips with a reverence that made her chest tighten. "You have proven yourself," he said softly, "not just to me, but to every soul in this camp. You are no longer a visitor in my world. You are a part of it, my family, my life." Elena's lips curved in a tentative smile, the kind born of relief and pride. "I feared I would never belong," she admitted, "but now I understand. I have a place here. I have a life worth fighting for." Kadon pulled her gently toward the lodge, their hands intertwined. Around them, the tribe watched in quiet, awe as the king led his bride forward, not as a possession, not as a political alliance, but as a partner. The elders nodded, warriors straightened, and even the women who had once observed her with suspicion now offered silent acknowledgment. She had earned respect, not through words or status, but through courage, strength, and unwavering resolve. Inside the lodge, the warmth of the fire welcomed them. Kadon gestured for her to sit, and she did, watching him as he moved to the center. The flickering light cast shadows across his face, softening the stern lines, revealing the man beneath the king. He had fought battles, carried losses, and borne the weight of leadership, yet here, in this moment, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "You asked for a son," Kadon said quietly, his gaze holding hers, "and I promised you. But know this, Elena, what we build together is more than lineage or duty. It is trust, it is courage, it is love. And if you stay with me, it will be ours every day, every night, Her heart swelled. She had come to this land as a bride uncertain of her future, seeking only security, a place where she could exist without fear. Now she realized she had found more than that. She had found a family, a partner, and a love that burned brighter than any desert sun. Elena stepped closer, resting her hand lightly against Kadon's chest. "I want that," she whispered. "Not just for a night or for duty, but for every moment we are given. I want to be with you, Kadon, fully, completely." A faint smile brushed across his lips, rare and fleeting, yet more expressive than any ceremony could convey. "Then stay," he murmured, lowering his forehead to hers. "Stay with me. Let us build this life together, fearless, unshaken, and bound by more than blood or promise. Bound by choice, by courage, by fire." And so, as the sun climbed higher, the camp came alive with movement and life. Elena walked through the desert sands beside Kadon, no longer an outsider, no longer a girl lost in a foreign land. She walked as a bride, a partner, and soon, a mother, one who would carry his child, a son born of their love and strength. Around them, the tribe thrived, protected by warriors and women alike, and in the quiet spaces between the fires and the mountains, the bond between king and bride burned bright and unyielding. The winds of the desert carried a new promise, one of family, of courage, and of love that could withstand any storm. Elena had asked for a son, but she had received far more than she could have imagined. She had received a life, a home, and a man whose heart had once been closed to the world, but was now open to her, wholly and unreservedly. As Kadon lifted her into his arms and carried her through the camp, the tribespeople fell silent in awe and respect. The desert had witnessed countless storms, countless battles, and countless lives lost, but in this moment it bore witness to something rarer and more powerful, the birth of a future forged by courage, bound by love, and illuminated by fire that would never be extinguished.